We're really excited today to have Clay Anderson on our podcast. Clay is the Senior Managing Director for Berkadia Investment Sales. He joined them in 2023. Before that, he spent a long time at Colliers. He sold over $2 billion in real estate while there and was in the top 10% of all commercial real estate agents nationwide most years. Clay is the father of five. He had, including his first set of kids, were triplets. I've known Clay for almost 30 years, and it was really nice catching up with him. Most importantly, Clay Anderson is Coach Wade Anderson's son. So hope you enjoy this, Clay Anderson. This is going to be fun today. Clay, welcome.
Thank you. Good to see you, Tommy.
This will be fun.
Thanks for having me.
So I was trying to think, well, first of all, Clay Anderson. We're going to talk about one of the biggest business leaders kind of here in the Valley, known you for a long time, but you will always, forever for me, be Coach Anderson's son.
And I take that title with pride.
So I'm going to talk about, I don't know the exact math, but it's almost probably almost 30 years ago.
Wow.
That I met you for the first time. So Clay Anderson, we'll get into your business stuff you got going on right now, but I met you first when I was playing basketball at Rick's College. And playing is, I use that term loosely.
You were a good player.
I
passed you the ball in warm-ups as the ball boy.
Yeah, warm-ups I was great. Shot a lot of three-pointers and then would sit the bench. But you were a ball boy during that time, and I think you would go get popcorn for us and bring it back to us when we were sitting on the bench.
Whatever I could do to earn my spot on the bench as myself, I'd help out.
We had a great team, but your dad. So let's talk a little bit about you. Can we start this thing off with the legend?
It's always a good place to start.
Oh my word! So Coach Wade Anderson was my basketball coach at Rick's College, and I'm going to tell a story, and then I want you to tell me about your dad.
Sure.
I've met a lot of people in my life that make an impact on you, but I remember the first couple of times I was around him. He would the way he looked at you and the way he engaged you in conversation, you immediately felt like this guy's listening to me. And I think that was like the first thing. And then his interactions with you were just genuine and sincere, and you immediately kind of felt like you had a friendship with him. And then I remember multiple times, and I know this is a long time ago, that he would course correct you. In a way that I had not experienced before. It was always in this very direct but loving way. He just was an incredible guy. And so I've maintained a relationship with him this entire time, and I want to talk a little bit about that too. But what was it like growing up as Coach Anderson's son?
That is a loaded question. I appreciate the kind words. He is a great man. He was a great father. I feel like I won the lottery. Growing up, he's always been very sports oriented. My friends would come to my house and ask if my dad could play, because he'd throw the football in the backyard, and of course I was involved in that too. But he was always one that if he had time, he'd make time for the neighborhood kids. His background of sports, back then it was farming community. He grew up in Rupert, Idaho, and his parents didn't really understand sports and why it even mattered, and so he didn't play in high school. He wanted to try out. His dad said, "Hey, it's too far. We're not going to get you back and forth." So he played church ball, got to Rick's College, and the coach said, "Hey, you're pretty good. Do you want to play? What do you think about the team?" And he said, "Where did you play in high school?" And my dad said, "Well, I didn't play in high school." So they cut him. So they thought, how could a kid, there must be something we're missing with him. And then that year, the intramural team played the college team, and my dad lit him up, and he said, "Hey, we got to have you on the team." So anyway, kind of a different way to get to college basketball, and he played at Utah State after that. So just his passion for sports and being driven. And as a father, so I played basketball through college. I also liked to skateboard. And I think of the wisdom he had, those kind of junior high years, you're figuring out what you like. And I had skateboard friends, and I had basketball friends. And there was an all-star team I was trying out for in the summer. I maybe was a year too early in trying out, so I was like, well, do I even go, or should I go skate with my buddies? My dad was very wise in not pushing too hard. He'd ask a lot of good questions that made you think about your direction in life. He'd ask questions about my friends, not judging them, but just asking, hey, where are they going in life? And But he did it in such a way that I course corrected a lot of things in my life that benefited me in a good way, but that made it my choice and my direction versus my dad saying, hey, this is what I think you should do. And a lot of wisdom, and as you shared, how he listens. He's a very active listener. And I with my dad now, even when I call him, and he's always got a good ear for a story, and he's always been a good storyteller as well. So,
talk about his way of motivating, because there's lots of different ways to coach. There's lots of different ways to motivate people, whether it's at work,
yeah,
whether it's your family or whatever. But leadership is interesting, and what I've always appreciated about Coach Anderson was you respected him so much because of the way he listened and because of the way he led, that you just wanted to please that guy.
Yeah, that is true. He's one it's hard not to respect him because he respects people. This is a side story, and I'll get to that question, but I'd walk around the Hart Gymnasium, which is a big building with all sorts of sports in it, and various people that kept charge of facilities and equipment rentals. And I remember one of the guys pulled me aside and said, you know what makes your dad special is he cares about all of us. And a lot of coaches won't give us the time. I don't even know our names. He'll always stop, ask us questions, see how we're doing. And that's always hit me hard, that he cares about everybody. People are people, and they all have a story. And because of that, you then want to please him. You want to do well by him and for him. And that's, for me, first time I caught a fish in Alaska, I got to call my dad.
Yeah.
He's not a big fisherman, but I want to please him and make him proud. And
it's, as we've have different guests on here and you talk about leadership and what makes up, we got a lot of people that listen to this to try to, and that idea of being genuine and authentic and caring about other people and in a real way, I think it just is part of every really great leader.
Yeah.
And that's what he is. Well, last thing, and then we'll move on. But as I've stayed close to him, one of my most cherished things is he's a Louis L'Amour fan.
Yeah, for sure.
And one of the times we were texting back and forth, he found out that I like Louis L'Amour too. And so he sent me an old Louis L'Amour book, and he wrote in the cover of that book to me. And I know right where that is on my shelf, and I love that guy. He's a legend. We need to have him on here.
We should.
Drop some Coach Anderson truth bombs.
There would be plenty. As he's gotten older, he's gotten a little more vocal, so.
He has. It's been really funny. He's a lot more vocal, but I love that guy. Okay, so you grew up in Rexburg, had a great, and then played at Rick's.
Played at Rick's, served a mission from a church, came back, another year at Rick's. Then my wife and I, we met at Rick's, got married, and then both played basketball in Alaska.
That's great. And then I'm going to flash forward a little bit. You've been in real estate investment, Colliers for a long time, raised your family here, and that's when we reconnected.
Yeah,
is when we started doing real estate stuff. But I know how important your family is to you, and I want to stop there before we get into business, Clay, because I think that's a big deal.
Yeah.
Tell me about your family, and then I want to talk about your daughter.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Yeah, so we have 5 kids, triplets that are now 24 years old. We were in Arizona at the time. I started my career in public accounting, and our triplets were 6 years old, had just finished kindergarten. My wife's...
How was it having triplets? We got to stop there.
Yeah, that could be... I've kind of blocked out a lot of those first couple of years. It was pretty intense. Being our first, it was really helpful. We didn't know any different. We had a lot of support. Selena's parents were retired, so they moved down to Phoenix for a little while, helped us out. Her mom was great at getting us in a good, really good routine. And then she actually moved back to Idaho for 5 or 6 weeks until the triplets could kind of hold their own bottle, and we could figure out how to feed them without...
And you're feeding you're just plugging mouths, right?
Yeah. I remember
plugging mouths and changing diapers.
The minivan with the auto door was designed for a father of triplets. I'm carrying kids, trying to hit the button, and so it was pretty intense. And then when my wife's dad had passed away, kids had just finished kindergarten. We thought if we ever get back closer to family, we're both from Idaho. It's now, because we loved Phoenix. We realized more and more we'd get settled in with kids and friends, it'd be harder. So we moved back in 2006. But yeah, family to me is everything. Every time I've looked at opportunities within my career that made me cause me to more travel, and some figure out how to figure out that balance. For me, I wanted to be in my own bed at night and be around my family and be an influence for my kids and be there for them. So that's always been a high priority for me in anything that I do, is how does it impact my family.
Well, it certainly paid off with your kids, right? And they've done
Yeah.
great things. I do want to talk about, you called me, so one of your daughters had kidney dysfunction, and we talked a little bit about that, and then she ended up going through a transplant. And your
Yeah.
wife ended up being a donor.
Yes. Yeah.
You're uniquely, and kind of amongst my friends, someone that I don't have a lot of people that have been through that. So talk through the experience and what listeners may want to know about that process and being a donor and how it all works, because I think I learned a lot through that with you, and I'd love
Yeah.
to hit on that.
Well, that's interesting with your background. You'd have a few friends in that category, but it's not that common. We don't know that many that have gone through it. But yeah, our daughter, when she was 2.5, fell into a ditch. We got her right out, but she got exposed to E. coli. Her kidneys shut down. She was on, dialysis and life support in primary children's for 5 weeks, and then her kidneys miraculously came back on. But we always knew that someday her function is low, and that they would eventually fail. So she was playing college volleyball, junior college volleyball, and her kidney function had just continued to decline. And by the time she finished her sophomore year, first semester of sophomore year, volleyball was just ending as her kidneys went into, by definition, a failure. And at that point, it was a process of finding a good match, which my wife and I both were being tested for that, and others. And so yeah, that process was, and it was in the middle of COVID. So they had to isolate, and so we had to help them figure out how to get an apartment in Utah. The transplant occurred at Intermountain Health down there. And her husband, I look at just the events of her life, finding Eli, her husband, getting married, and how he's such a problem solver and has been such an amazing support and so understanding of that as a function of their marriage, and has been incredible. So, she's 2 years post-transplant. My wife's doing great. When she gets blood work done, she has to remind him, hey, I only have one kidney, so don't think that these elevated levels are abnormal. They're normal for one person with one kidney.
Talk us through the decision of kind of matching, right? Because that's the first thing that happens.
Yeah.
Then they come back and say you're compatible. And then what's the decision process? 'Cause it's a donation. I know people do it, and it's your daughter, and it's everything else, but
Yeah.
how does that go?
Well, and I feel like a chump myself, my testing, I wasn't, they saw some things, maybe some pre-diabetic things or other things. They said, yeah, we want to put you in the back seat for now. My wife, we honestly were told she couldn't be a donor. It was an administrative error of one person. And so then when we kind of cleared that up, she did her full testing, and it's a no-brainer, right? As a parent, she had no hesitation, no reservations. The moment that they met was powerful post-surgery. You couldn't even describe in words, my daughter's reaction seeing her mother, who they have a great relationship, as someone that saved her in effect and giving her kidney. And it was powerful. It was absolutely powerful. And they've always had an incredible bond, and I don't know that it strengthened it more than it could have already been, but they have a special bond, and she's a special daughter.
Incredible story. I'm glad she's doing so well.
She's doing great. Yeah.
I know you were really worried about her.
Yeah, it was. I still today say you're our miracle child, and she's such a glue to our family that I am so thankful that she's on the earth still. She just,
Well, thanks for sharing that. Let's talk business now, because there's a lot of stuff I want to get to.
Yeah.
Because you got a lot of expertise and a lot of things going on right now in the Valley. But talk us through kind of your career path and getting to Berkadia, which is your latest move.
Yeah. I'm not one that moves a lot. I was at Colliers from 2006 to 2022. Really enjoyed my time there. Really enjoyed the team I worked with and the different groups. But yeah, in 2006, when we decided to get back to Idaho, it was a pretty big pivot for me to go from an accounting world with secured income and good benefits to, all right, you eat what you kill, right? And so we always say, when we look to people to hire, we want...
And the timing of this is 06, right?
06, yeah, life's good. The world's cranking.
You couldn't have picked a better time to go into it, and then 18 months, 2 years later, right?
Exactly, yeah, a slight taste of success to realize, hey, this is fun, and I think I could be good at this, to then kind of slug through those rougher years. And my wife was very supportive. She saw I really thrived and enjoyed it, and we kind of made it through those rougher years, and then came out on top. But it was a big pivot and a big change for me to shift. And so we moved back to Idaho, and in those years at Colliers, broadly investment sales with a team, and we sold a couple $1 billion over that period of time between office towers, retail centers, apartment complexes. Sold some stuff for you,
Yeah.
which was fun. And then as my business continued to mature and the multifamily space continued to mature and grow in the valley, we saw that as kind of every year I'd evaluate my book of business and say, all right, where am I making my money? Where am my strongest, my expertise and valued? And it was always, I need to spend more time in apartments. And so Berkadia was the move that allowed me to kind of push that even further with my partner Spencer Hansen. And once the market here matured, there were quite a few of the nationals that really wanted to drop a beachhead in Boise. So you either start from scratch or you buy the best team. And they said, okay, we've found the best team. Let's figure out how to get them. So it became a bit of a recruiting process. And we realized, hey, if we're talking to one group, we should probably talk to several. And for us, Berkadia just head and shoulders above the rest, felt like the right move and a good opportunity. So yeah, beginning of 2023, just a little over a year ago, we joined Berkadia.
How's it been?
It's been good. Yeah, I think it's, you assess the market relative to the past.
Yeah.
And
The company's been great. Let's get into the market a little bit. If you could talk through, because there's a few things that I do think you are the go-to expert on. I mean, you've been here, as you said, you were investment, but I remember when you kind of focused more, maybe on the multifamily side. I remember meeting with you and having you talk about opportunities. And I remember walking away from our conversations thinking, man, that because some of it didn't make sense to me, right? I mean, if you were here during this run up, you were ahead of the curve. Let me say that. We'd leave things and you'd say, hey, we're 5,000 or 8,000 apartment units short. We need to go. We need to do this. There's activity in the market where people are buying older apartment units, rehabbing them, and increasing the rents. And talk us through what happened in Boise. You had the Great Recession in 07, 08. We kind of had some recovery. But you were there when this kind of run up to all these apartments happened. And talk us through that natural history.
Sure. Yeah. So 2006, get into the market. That was a space I wanted to focus on, but you focus on one area too much in a small market, you starve, right? So we covered multiple bases and sold a lot of the product. But if you look at the trend and history of apartments in Boise, those early operators, typical tenant was a 6 to 12 month tenant because they'd look and say, hey, yeah, okay, I'm paying $800 in rent. I can buy a house for 125 grand. I'm only going to be here for 6 months, 12 months my house is being built. So if you look at the apartment stock back then on a relative per capita basis, relative to other markets like Reno, Vegas, Salt Lake, Phoenix, we have a low amount of apartment stock per capita. And it was because of the affordability of housing. Why would I go build apartments when rents aren't really pushing? And if I try to push rents, it's just that quicker path to buying a home. Obviously, you look at the trend in home pricing over time here, just exploding up, and affordability has really gapped out. And then the apartment on a per capita basis starts to shift in more with the regional trend. So we have a lot of room for growth. So the thing is...
So I'm going to ask you a few questions.
Yeah.
So you're going to get into apartment rents, and the vernacular here is it's $1 per square foot kind of a deal, right?
Yeah.
So take us through post-recession, 2010, 2011, kind of those days, or maybe even before. What were kind of average rents in the Treasure Valley then, to just give people an idea of where we started?
Yeah, and we usually quote a price per foot per month.
Yep.
So if I'm saying $1 a foot, that's $12 per year, not including the utilities. Back then, they didn't even charge, the landlord absorbed the water, sewer, trash, utility, and then that kind of became a carve-out piece that they started charging. They call it RUBS. It's resident utility bill back. They charge a tenant anywhere from $50 to $100 a month to kind of recoup those dollars. So that was a rent increase of 5 to 8% that just naturally happened with just a shift in terminology and different collections. But yeah, if you go back, pre-2010, we saw a little bit of a dip in migration. And so our occupancy if you take the aberration out of 08, 09, we've been at 95, 98% occupancy for, 18 years.
And rates
back then were, close to $1 a foot.
And was that with or without the RUB?
Without RUBs. So you didn't collect RUBs, so you were just sitting on, $1 a foot rents. And occupancy dipped during the recession down into the 90s, really tight 90s, and they were giving up a month of free rent as well to kind of keep, the ship floating.
Yeah.
But quickly as soon as we kind of came out of it, 2010, and people started migrating back to Boise more consistently, went back up to 94, 95%. You saw the early adopters that did it in other markets bringing in RUBs, like, hey, we can charge RUBs. the first guy's always nervous, like, hey, if I do it,
Yeah.
their tenants leave. Once a few groups did it, and it's been more the out-of-state groups, and then like the older school owners still don't charge rubs. It's probably maybe 20% of the market that doesn't. So oftentimes a buyer will be like, oh my gosh, I can buy this deal and I get a 5 to 8% rent increase automatically by just implementing this program. But since then, yeah, we've moved up. Our rents are, on average north of we're probably $1.80 across the board. The other thing that occurred is downtown never had true urban housing at a premium to the market. And the primary reason for that is, you look at Boise, and I lived in South Meridian now for the whole time I've been here, 12 miles to downtown, 15-minute commute,
Yeah.
right? So the appeal of Chicago downtown is I can avoid a 2-hour commute. Here, it's like, my commute now is 3 minutes versus 15, big deal. But, those earlier pioneers, Roundhouse, others came in and built downtown product and proved out a rent that was 50% higher than the suburbs. Once that was established, now we're looking at rents downtown in the $3 rent range for the smaller units. The Arthur, that big project, just under 300 units on the tower with Oppenheimer. That's they're going to be pushing high rents, high amenities, and so it kind of pulls the.
What are they going to market at?
So they'll be pushing high threes per foot on the smaller stuff, potentially even $4 a foot.
So talk us through kind of what a $4 a foot monthly rent is on what are the average sizes on?
Well, yeah. So the one we walked was actually really well built. We toured with the guys, walked through it. It's a 500 square foot unit. It's a quasi studio. It's got a separate bedroom that kind of blends into the kitchen area. Really well designed as far as this. For 500 feet, I was amazed how comfortable it felt. So think about that. That's it's $2,000 a month. You got roughly a studio or one bedroom. You've got your garage, which you charge separately for, but rooftop deck with pool, gym, golf simulator, concierge coffee on the ground floor. So they're really delivering an amenity package that's bar none.
Yeah.
Almost like you'd say, do you live downtown? Well, the typical answer would be yes, unless you live at the Arthur. And then you'd be like, oh, I live at the Arthur.
Yeah.
That's kind of what it felt like anyway. We'll see how they deliver.
Yeah.
They've delivered in bigger markets. But you look at those kind of, and then similarly out of downtown where groups start developing higher amenitized projects, pushing rents, delivering a better product. And kind of almost like what you guys did with Zions Bank, you kind of rose the tide of rents in downtown by showing, hey, you deliver a better product, people will pay more for it. Then all of a sudden, all the other office owners downtown say, we got to step up our game,
Yeah.
right? We got to improve our amenities, we got to improve our lobby. So it's that to me has been healthy to deliver just a better product in the market.
So I really like how you've talked about the downtown segment of the market because it's been different. I remember when we did 8th and Main, right?
Yeah, you did a great job.
So, well, you had the Boise Hole, and
Yeah.
a lot of people are too young to even remember
That
the
story
Boise
is awesome, though. Yeah.
But we do that, and then we immediately went across the street and did City Center Plaza with the bus station underneath it, and those were really good times. But I remember in almost every meeting I had with the city or with people down there that love downtown, they would say, why are you doing office? You need to do residential. You need to do residential. You need to do residential.
Yeah.
And at the time, there was just like, oh, are you kidding me? It was like this, we're trying to solve the hole first, right?
Yeah.
So it's been really interesting and fun to watch because I think you go downtown now, and especially with what Skip's doing, with the building that he's doing, and I mean, my goodness, we went from very little housing, no new starts, kind of old product to so many options down there so quickly.
Yes.
That it's really changed downtown, and now you can truly live, work, and be downtown. That's expensive.
Yes. You pay for the privilege. You know what's interesting too is, and you were a pioneer in the pushing the office rents. Back then, had you said, I'm going to build a big tower of apartments, what lender's going to lend on it?
No one would have. Yeah.
No one would have.
Yeah.
So like Roundhouse, their first deal, they had to renovate the Owyhee hotel rooms into apartments and prove out a rent structure that could justify a lender financing. And so it was kind of this block step moving forward. But yeah, now that it happens, it starts to build on itself, and there's more confidence, more comfort around it, and all those pieces have just made our downtown more vibrant. But those early deals too, what was interesting is I remember talking to Roundhouse, and they're like, oh yeah, we're the young millennials and the working class. There was a lot of boomers that were coming to market that wanted all the same things. They want walkability, entertainment, and so there's a pretty good blend of people that want to be downtown.
Well, we do. If you think you travel around, you go to other downtowns. We have an amazing downtown Boise, right?
Yeah.
It's clean. It's walkable. There's great restaurants and businesses. It just always feels good. So, it's a great place to be. Can we shift now to the suburbs? Because I think at the exact same time, you have had a boom of apartment buildings in Meridian, Nampa, Caldwell even.
Yeah.
And I think it's the affordability thing. So I think the good news, bad news of today's podcast is, the bad news is it's become really expensive for people to live
Yeah.
in the Treasure Valley.
Yeah.
It's been, where do you find a house? How do you find a house? And then now you've had this bump in interest rates, which I want to get to with you as well, because it's really thrown new apartments on its head.
Yes.
But for a while, talk about the boom of apartments and how they were being underwritten, which when I first started, we don't do apartments. When I first started looking, I'm like, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
I mean, some of these apartment projects were being underwritten at cap rates that were just like, how on earth is that going to work?
Yeah. No, that's a good point. And you kind of walk through the history of that. When they typically build like you do, you'd say, what's my return on cost? And how does that in relation to my cost of funds, which is equity and debt?
Yeah.
And if debt back then were in the tight sixes, they're like, we got to deliver a return on cost above that. So it's got to be 6.5. Our market had so much growth. A lot of guys were just on the margin, like, hey, we're borrowing at 6, we're building at a 6 on return on cost. Thankfully for them, because the market had so much pressure up, by the time they delivered it, they were actually at a 6.5% return on cost. Their rents were higher than they pro forma'd. And so they were in a good space. And then, of course, as rates drop and they refi, they've got this massive margin.
Yeah.
So life is great, right? Then, and again, we can talk more about this.
And thus, it fueled a tremendous amount of growth, right? Just the market conditions were such that housing prices were going through the roof. People needed apartments. There's more people moving back.
Right.
We've got this in-migration. You've got, and another thing that I wanted to hit on with you is, like, you've been here long enough, like, the jobs available for people to take also has changed tremendously over the last decade, where now, Gordon Jones said this last week when he was on the podcast. He's like, it used to be when we recruited someone in here, they said, well, where do I go if I don't have this job?
Yeah, sure.
And now you're like, our ecosystem, the business ecosystem is so strong that you've got a lot of reasons people are staying here. More kids are staying here, so you got a pressure on housing. You have these economic conditions which make it super attractive and easy for you to just kind of blow and go and do apartments.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it all was kind
all
of
those
this
things.
perfect environment, right?
Yeah. And that always has been the criticism. I think we'd have a lot of people come to town and say, this is an amazing place, and we see good performance in apartments and housing prices are going up. In the past, it didn't always correlate to jobs. Like, you look at Phoenix and you go, hey, okay, Taiwanese company dropping in $20 billion, new plant coming in. Other fab companies come in, and you'd say, I see the jobs, I see the growth. It's just really clear. Boise has always been a little bit blurry, and we do have a bit of that, they call it the CalPERS money, right? The retired police officer, fireman, teacher that says, I'm taking my pension and I'm coming to Idaho, Utah, wherever. That piece has always thrown people off a little bit, like, hey, your jobs don't always line up with the correlation of growth. But to your point, as we have grown, it does create more innovation. People are like, I got to be here. I want my kids to be here. I'm going to create a new company. I'm going to create a business. I'm going to start something new. And so you see, the different, Clearwater, T-Sheets, all these companies that have started and grown here, and it's been really healthy. And so, it gets people more comfortable that, okay, if I take this one job and the job doesn't work, there are other options for me within the Treasure Valley. But all those things are concerning to us, right? As parents, how do our kids come back to Idaho?
Yeah.
Affordability.
So what I want to get in, so then there was this tremendous growth. You saw very little vacancy. You saw pro formas for apartments they were actually predicting increases, right? So they would have their true pro forma, and then they would have the projected pro forma, which gave them a bump in rate that they could charge.
Yeah.
And it allowed this growth to happen. Then I think everyone kind of knew this would stop.
Yeah.
Because of inflation, and you had COVID, you had more money dumped into the economy, and then it did, right?
Yeah.
And even though no one was surprised that it did, walk us through what that's done to the multifamily market in the Treasure Valley.
Yeah, sure. So,
and nationally, really, right?
Yeah, we can take a couple examples too. So we were selling a deal in Bozeman, Montana, and they had a similar issue, but a smaller market. COVID caused a hyper growth, right? Those are good growing markets, Boise, Bozeman, Salt Lake. With COVID, all of a sudden, it's like, I can work from anywhere. I'm being restricted in my outdoor activities and other activities and school activities in these bigger cities. I'm getting out. I'm going to Boise, I'm going to Bozeman. So Bozeman had this hyper growth with lack of supply. We were selling a deal in the market. It had 3% money. We were chasing and getting close to selling it for $600,000 per door. Rents were through the roof. It was 3% money could be assumed. The perfect storm. We were under contract at less than that. It ended up falling apart.
Put that in context. So your Bozeman, Montana, $600,000 a door. If you look back 5, 6, 7 years ago, average selling price of it would be what?
Yeah, the average unit price in that market would have been similar to Boise. It would have, for a good deal, it would have been, maybe high ones, low 200s per door.
Yeah. So
just massive growth, right?
growth.
And the same, and we can take an example in Boise. We sold a couple deals that, a year or two earlier would have been sub 200 a door, that we were kind of stretching to that 400 per door range. And the story of it was, okay, I can borrow money at 3%. I'm buying at a 4 cap, maybe even a tighter than a 4 cap, but the rent trade-outs were massive. So one of the projects we sold, they were in lease-up for a long period of time. It was a big project in phases. And so as the tenants that had been there for 12 months were coming up for renewal, they were still filling this other side, $800 higher than the same unit had rented for a year earlier. So this tenant shows up in the office, hey, I'm ready to renew. Great, $800 more per month. What are you talking about? So these lease trade-outs, they call it loss to lease. Like, what does it take? How much loss to lease is sitting in my rent roll that once all tenants catch up to market, where does that put my income? And underwriters, buyers, for a time, that was their, early on they realized, hey, I want to buy on the trailing 12. I want to buy on past income. A seller's like, well, I'm not going to give you past because I got this massive story of growth that I need to capture first before you buy it. Well, so then there became a little bit of a meeting of the minds of a buyer saying, okay, I've got to pay you for a big part of that or I'm not going to get the deal. And so the question became, okay, what's the past income, but what's the income once loss to lease burns off? And they would underwrite to that and say, okay, that's in the bank, right? And at times, and it didn't happen as much here, but what happened, it got people in trouble and has been getting people in trouble, is they would say, well, the lender looks back, I look forward. The lender has to underwrite to the past. They can't capture these $800 pops. So I don't want to get a permanent tenure loan when I know once I recapture all that, I can get a nicer, bigger loan. So they do a bridge loan. 2 years.
Higher percentage rate.
Maybe in the front end it's low, but it's got variable components to it. 2 years later, they execute perfectly. Their rent goes up. Their 3% money's not there.
Yeah.
It's now 6.5. So that's where people got in trouble. Not as much here. But to the point of more development, and most markets now are in a little bit of an oversupply that's getting absorbed.
Can I ask you that question?
Yeah.
I've been dying to ask this question. So you hear now there's been rent compression.
Yep.
Right? So I think, and you'll hear, well, we kind of overbuilt. How much of it is truly supply that we have overbuilt apartments? Because I think on the single family side, still hear that there's still a supply issue.
Yes.
And everyone's saying that. And you look at the market for single family homes, it's certainly plateaued, but it hasn't come down. So how much of what's happened in the multifamily market is true oversupply versus just the economics of the reset? Does that make sense?
No,
or is that even a bad question?
No, it's a good question. I think, first of all, you look at our home builders, they got burned in 2007.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And so when COVID hit, they all just pulled back.
Yep.
They're like, hey, we saw this rodeo before. We're not.
Been down that path before.
And then all of a sudden they're like, hey, people want to be here. Turn on the machine again. And then when rates go up, same thing. I saw, you see a lot of them just, hey, we got to pull back. And home pricing and availability of product has not been there for, it seems like demand is still kind of outstripping supply.
Yeah.
Because the incumbent homeowner that has a 3% mortgage is not selling. So it's only new homes that are selling. And so, we still have that pressure. And getting home lots to production, they seem like there's always stuff ready to go. It feels more fluid and liquid. Whereas if you're going with apartments, you're working through the process, you get your construction loan. If you're going, you're marching forward. And because you're that far down the road. And when we sold a few of those deals in 21, 22, and we're hitting, 400 per door, and their pro forma is saying, hey, I can build this for, depending, 300 and change. There's a huge margin for them. They're going to go build.
Yeah.
So it did create a bit of a push where we got a lot of product.
Makes sense. So
yeah.
So with a single family, there was maybe a little natural slowdown. Hey, we've seen this before. Multifamily, you can't slow this thing down.
Yeah.
It's a bigger machine to slow down, and you're like, hey, And I do think this is true. I'm going to ask you this if it's true, but like the long-term outlook for an area like ours with housing and jobs and growth and what Micron's doing and what's happening here, this is all going to be fine, right?
Yes. Yep.
So I think they also, and then can you answer that question? And then we had nationals come in here, right?
Oh yeah.
So
yeah.
so not only was it kind of local-ish development companies doing apartments, we had kind of the big nationals coming in doing apartments.
Yes.
And I think they have a longer view. They've seen this before. So comment on both those things.
Yeah. So when you look at national and just broader equity, they all had a Boise on their radar, but trying to find a deal of size and scale that they could write a real check for, it took a while. But yeah, you see, Carlisle, Blackstone, others, either check writers or direct, DeBartolo, other groups that are coming in developing, a PEG. I mean, there's just plenty of groups that are coming in on a regional to national platform and saying this is a market we want to be in. And so that's been healthy. And most of them, if they didn't get here during 21, 22, just like the majority of national equity or kind of true capital that's institutional, they aren't doing a whole lot, right? I mean, Blackstone just bought the AR portfolio, $10 billion. We can talk about that too as a kind of bigger national trend thing. But if they didn't get here, they're like, okay, we're not going to go to the boardroom and try to approve a Boise deal when we're not even know if we're going to approve a deal in Boston or wherever else. But those that are here are very bullish. It's a long-term prospect.
So already made a commitment, already here, boots on ground, already understand kind of our ecosystem.
Yep.
They're going.
Yep. And back in the recession, I remember some of the bigger REITs, apartment REITs, they pulled out of smaller markets. They said, we got burned, we're going to focus on core markets.
Yeah.
Those that are here are not pulling back. It's like long-term, mid-term, incredible outlook. Short-term, yeah, we got to work through some of these operational issues of supply. And we have. Last spring was light. We took several deals out. And occupancy was a little light. We're like, hey, spring always kind of cures any occupancy issues, so let's just work through it. We still had good migration in, but we just had better supply. Now, through the last fall, winter, and now coming to this spring, it's a lot more healthy. We're seeing occupancy rates kind of climb back up. We'll be fine absorbing the inventory that we have in front of us, but yeah, there's the spigot's turned off on next round development.
The other question for you is, I think because the machine is bigger, right? It's a bigger thing. There also now has been a pause.
Yes.
So there's probably going to be the pendulum going the other direction.
That's right.
Which is now absorption needs to happen in the apartment complexes that happen. We still have this supply issue, medium and long term.
Yeah.
And so it'll just take a while to crank back up. So you'll probably see, another boom.
Yeah.
When rates take care of themselves here. This is your world, right? Rates, you understand more than I do. And I think that we all have been wrong for a long time. I think even after the Great Recession, we talked about rates going up at some point.
Yeah.
And they just never did. Then COVID came, but they finally did.
Yeah.
Now, if you go back to last fall, I think we were all saying, oh, good, we're going to get, and I think the Fed even signaled, hey, you're going to have a couple decreases.
Yeah.
But as we sit here today, mid-end April, I think they're probably going to bump it again. Or if not bump it, at least keep it right where it is. What's your prediction, Clay, for this year?
That's a loaded question, right? Yeah, and I think they originally very firm. I think 80% of market sentiment was there would be a market or a drop in rate in June.
Yep.
That's down to maybe 15% confidence, and I think it would highly unlikely be that they lower rates. Increasing, yeah, I sure hope, and I don't think that they will. Most would still predict a couple modest rate drops later in the year. It's just pushing everything out further. The whole political environment is tricky, right? And some would say, oh, they've got to do something to kind of stabilize the political environment a little bit. So they've got to keep flat or pull back a little bit to kind of give the economy a little bit of a shot in the arm. Plenty of economists would say they're looking at the wrong variables. We don't have inflation, but there are components of inflation. So it's hard to say. The question now is, are people, investors, capital, they want predictability.
Yeah. So
even like lenders, their spreads have widened, right? So if you take the 10-year Treasury as your baseline to start with as a lender, and you say, I want 2% or 200 bips above that as my risk premium to lend, they were getting tight in their spreads back in the day because it was, hey, it's 3% money. the tenures at 0 or at 1, and we have this little spread. Well, now tenure jumps, and they're, because of lack of predictability, they widen their spread. So, we were working with a bank, looking at the loan that they have that has a rate increase, but the spread is tighter on the original loan than it would be have they quote it today. So that's the problem with it, is lack of predictability causes people to be paralyzed. And if they said, hey, we're not doing anything, it's just going to stay where it is, then the market would pick up, because they'd factor that into the underwriting on the lending side, on the capital side. I mean, and that's a good sign people talk about with Blackstone buying this AAR portfolio. It's a $9.5 billion transaction at about a 6 cap of just high Class A coastal properties. That's a pretty fair deal. It feels pretty fair, and they've got lower cost of funds on the debt side. I mean, their cost of capital can be higher because they have opportunities, but I think the market would say, hey, that feels like a pretty good
Indicator, right?
indicator that the market is balancing and finding footing, and then do others follow? Plenty of these funds have a hard time because their portfolio includes a lot of office in San Francisco.
Yeah.
I mean, you saw the deal in St. Louis sold for like $3
Yeah.
a foot. We were actually down there for a volleyball tournament with my son, and walking around downtown. Like, this is a cool downtown, and its best days have been behind it. And what are they going to do with these buildings? Some of it's just true obsolescence, right? That you have to figure out. Maybe it's priced at ground value, but so some of these bigger funds have to look at their full portfolio and say, gee, if I'm getting exposed in office or other areas, how do I balance out my portfolio? I'm not going to lend on anything for a while, right? So there's some of those pieces too playing out.
That's really helpful, and you have such knowledge on the back end of it. I don't know that you gave me an answer.
What was the question that I need to answer?
What's going to happen this year?
Oh,
you think it's going to stay flat?
I think we'll see 2 rate drops late in the year,
Okay.
but I think it'll be flat through most of summer.
Okay.
I
Let's go
could be a
back.
politician. I dodged the question.
You probably answered it, actually, because you kind of said that. Go back to the Treasure Valley, because I think people, if you're a developer, you look at the world one way.
Yeah.
And if you're a family here, a parent here that's got kids here, you're looking at this. Step back a little more globally, you look at what's happening with a lot of the growth we have. I don't think it really has ever slowed down much for us. It just kind of has chugged along, and I don't know of anything that's kind of slowed. It's just maybe paused a little bit or kind of reevaluating, but I think we're going to keep going. And I think with what's happening with all the investment here, and there's some just things about Idaho geopolitically, water rights, cost of electricity. There's just some things that are really bigger than us that are going to drive more people coming here.
Yeah.
So what's going to happen with housing and apartments and affordability and the balance here? What do you see the next 5 to 10 years being like here for the Valley?
That's a great question. So one thing you look at is the gap in affordability between renting and owning.
Yeah.
When interest rates were 3% plus or minus, there was still a gap between home ownership and renting because our pricing in homes had gone up. Well, now it's dramatically gapped out, right? Because to pay for a home and borrow at 7% versus renting, rents have grown, but they haven't doubled from 2022. That is a scary thing. I think that speaks to what I shared before about, the demand for apartments could be exponential to growth. So it's like, hey, we grew by 5%, but our apartment demand grew by 15% because a disproportionate amount of people coming in are going to go into apartments before they go into a house. I think some developers are more conscious and mindful of how do I deliver a smaller footprint home at a more reachable price. And that's where the demand really is. And part of the gap in that is, this trend nationally, which is coming here regionally, the build for rent product.
Yeah.
Building a townhome product that's a for rent product. You still have a little yard for your pet. You have the garage. It's a longer term tenant that you're targeting because they say, hey, instead of moving in with my first job and in 3 years trying to get into a house, it's probably 5 or 7 years. So I'd want to find something that's a little more comfortable for a family. And so that trend is occurring, and we're seeing several of those deals, kind of meet that need, but also home builders are trying to deliver that as a for-sale product to kind of cover that.
Isn't the real answer, and I know this is going to sound too simplistic, but the free market,
Absolutely.
America, people will figure out how to but it's really supply of all housing types, right?
Yes.
Options.
Yes.
Where if we let the free market work, and I think I worry sometimes because the government and regulation, sometimes they try to say, well, we need to fix this, so we're going to regulate ourselves into housing that's affordable. And I think nothing could be more detrimental to true housing costs than just saying, hey, let's make it easier for the market to decide what housing people want and need, and put their money at risk and go on the line, and let's make, and you got to be smart how you do that. I think the good news with Boise and Meridian and NAMP and our jurisdictions, Caldwell, there's a lot of thoughtful, hey, here's our comprehensive plan, here's where we want apartments, here's where we want. I worry a little bit even in Meridian. I mean, there's been a big backlash of, hey, we have enough apartments, we don't want any more apartments in Meridian. Yet you have these big major corridors of Overland and the freeway and
10 Mile
and Franklin and 10 Mile, which is the perfect place to put apartments. And I think the answer is to not regulate those things if we want to keep affordability. And so I think sometimes city councils and people making decisions are put in a bad position because they've got constituents saying, hey, we don't want any more apartments here. Well, you also want your kids to come back here and live, and we need all housing types. We just need to be smart where they put them. Any comments on that? I got on soapbox.
Man, that's a pretty. Capital is relatively smart, and if they're wrong, they pay for it.
Yeah.
And so capital flows where needs are, and I applaud developers that have the patience. I've sat in on a couple like city council meetings where I've had a vested interest, a listing where I'm like, hey, we're trying to figure this out, and I think, and I appreciate everybody that volunteers so much of their time. Some of the questions they ask, you got to be kidding me. Like, you're going to build these apartment complexes. What happens in 20 years when, these people are older and they don't want to live there anymore? And what's that going to, you're going, what are you talking about? 20 years from now, who knows what anything is going to happen? Are we all on hoverboards? I don't know. Yeah. Like, you're thinking, the question was so odd and didn't fit at all.
Yeah.
It's like, let's just throw that out and kind of get to fundamentals of, do you have an impact study? Do you have a traffic study to know how this is going to flow? But you're right. I mean, free markets will figure it out. Capital can make mistakes, but they pay for it.
Yeah.
And
And in an environment like ours that the growth is predictable,
yes,
you're going to need supply of all sorts of things, and just do it in a way. And what sometimes we get frustrated with is you spend government dollars on comprehensive planning. You talk about it ad nauseum for decades. You have a comprehensive plan and a master plan that you do, and then you want to deviate from your own master plan because constituents are worried about something, and you're like, well, wait a minute, this is exactly where we should be doing this product type.
Yep.
And I think we should always be looking at infill development too. I mean, if you think about, farmland and sustainability and all those sort of things, resources that go into infrastructure, I think infill projects that are more dense just make sense.
Yeah.
That with the zoning rewrite in Boise, it was always interesting for me to listen to conservative people bagging on the zoning rewrite because I'm thinking, well, wait a minute, this makes it easier to do infill.
Yeah.
We want to keep the cities and rural and make it easier and more options for people. How are you reconciling this? But sometimes in today's world, there's not reconciliation of political views.
Well, and it's the whole, the term gets thrown a lot, and it's very valid, NIMBYism, right? Not in my backyard. Yeah. It's like, we believe we need to have a home for everybody, but not in my backyard.
Right. Yep.
Don't be near me or my kids or my school. Go figure it out in this farm field. And it's like, well, anyway, that'll never be solved perfectly, but that always becomes the challenge.
Yeah. I've had a few of those with people around. In McCall, we had a little.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
You got people that are moving here from California saying, not in my backyard. And you're like, wait a minute.
What backyard are you claiming? Yeah.
What backyard are you claiming? Anyway, it's interesting. Well, Clay, thank you so much. This has been great. It's been great to get an update on what we're looking at. And I always love talking to you because you kind of the truth, what's happening on the ground with development and housing is one of the things that is the hardest thing to figure out for a community. And I appreciate you're in the middle of it. I also tell your dad hi. I'll text him after this and said I had the big dog on the podcast. We got to get him on.
We got to get him on. I think you'll get at least 20 views with my mom. She'll probably watch this over and over and say your hair was off a little bit, or But no, so I appreciate that. And it would be fun to have my dad or to see him on here with you. It'd be
Coach
awesome. I
Anderson.
appreciate the relationship you have with him and how you've helped him remember who he is. You know, as you get older, you kind of lose some of those contacts. And so I really appreciate that. It's pretty awesome.
My favorite Coach Anderson text was when he found out I had open heart surgery. He was like, "Hey, I'm a little bit older than you, but we're on the same page here. Welcome to the club." And it's been he every once in a while I'll scroll through his text because he's such an incredible man. I mean, the stuff he sends, and he's a great guy. Imagine that for 30 years.
No, that's awesome.
It's awesome.
That's awesome. You're a good man, Tommy. Appreciate your time.
Thanks for coming on.
You bet.